A thunderstorm burned a small coffin shop in the north of the city to ashes. The little owner Wen Shu was about to cry without tears, but when he was in despair, he accidentally dug out an iron box from the ashes. As the box unexpectedly opened, the magnificent and legendary world of mountains and seas unfolded before her one by one. The compass of the plant kingdom is lost in the valley, where one eats the fruit of Huaimu that can increase strength, wears it to bless the descendants of Lushu, and eats it to resist 100 poisons of ear rats. A few months later, a small tea house quietly built next to the land temple outside the city. At first, no one paid attention, but in less than half a month, it caught the attention of the whole city. Let's see how the young and timid playwright Wen Shu, a small financial fan, can use the classic of mountains and seas to make a fortune. The million completed article, Nongmen Fui, interested friends can take a step and watch during the fattening period. Keywords of the novel. Eating in the Great Song Dynasty. My system connects to Shanghai without pop-ups. Eating in the Great Song Dynasty. My system connects to Shanghai. Download the complete TXT collection, Eating in the Great Song Dynasty. My system connects to Shanghai. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. Wen Ji Coffin Shop. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Wen Ji Coffin Shop. In the autumn of the 32nd year of the Tianqing era, in Bianliang, Kyoto, there was a coffin shop in the north of the city. Listening to the rooster next door crowing twice, Wen Shu sat up helplessly from the bed. At this moment, the outside sky was getting brighter, but the inside was still dimly lit. She took the gray-brown short jacket from the head of the bed and put it on. She got out of bed, put on shoes, and walked to the dressing table. She yawned and wrapped her waist-length hair around her head with bamboo chopsticks. Roughly tidying up, she opened the door and a chill surged in, clearing her previously confused mind. At this time, the autumnal equinox has passed and the sky is getting colder. The mottled bluestone slabs in the courtyard were still covered with a thick layer of silver frost. Wen Shu gathered his clothes and shrunk his neck to walk towards the well in the courtyard. He poured a bucket of water from the well and carried it to the kitchen eaves. He then picked up a recently purchased toothbrush from the windowsill, dipped it in some tooth powder, and stood under the eaves to start brushing his teeth. Well water has an unparalleled advantage over lake water, which is warm in winter and cool in summer. At this time, the lake water outside is already icy cold and piercing, but the water in this well is slightly warm and can be washed well without adding hot water, which really saves a lot of charcoal fire. Grunt, grunt. Rinsed the salty tooth powder from his mouth with clear water. Wen Shu ponders whether to make tongue-skin noodles or steam mantou for breakfast later. Just before I could figure it out, I heard a creaking sound from the door behind me. Looking back, I saw that her father had already stood up, standing at the door in his cloak, frowning and looking at her. "Good morning, Dad," Wen Shu said with some nervousness. Grandpa Wen looked at her up and down, frowned, and said, "Where are you going in this outfit?" At this moment, she was wearing a gray-brown short shirt on her upper body, narrow-legged pants on her lower body, and her hair was hastily tied up in a bun on top of her head. She simply inserted a bamboo chopstick and dressed up like a kid. Mr. Wen is over the years without any confusion, with a Chinese-style face, thick eyebrows, large and slightly protruding eyes. His overall appearance looks a bit fierce, especially when he frowns at this moment. Those who are unfamiliar with him must think he is a bandit who kills people and gains goods. However, Wen Shu was not afraid of him at all. Seeing him frown, he just smiled and said, "That." Wang Yusher's family in Qianmen Street and Yuansong Lane hosted a full moon banquet and invited people from the 4th Bureau and 6th Bureau. Hu Xinyang suffered from a head disease yesterday and asked me to help him with the day's work. Upon hearing this, Grandpa Wen's eyebrows furrowed and he shouted, "Nonsense. How can you handle such a thing casually? You just need to help Miss Ling with her daily work. After all, you are both women." But Huzi works in the accounting department, and all the people who come and go there are men who do some moving and lifting work. You are a girl's family. Before he could finish speaking, Wen Shu called out, What's wrong with the girl's family? Your daughter's strength is not inferior to that of a man. Those tasks are very easy for me. Seeing her like this, Grandpa Wen really hated her for not being strong enough. Look at how proud you are. What good thing is that a girl has strong family strength? If it weren't for the concealment you didn't understand from a young age, you should have gotten married long ago at this age. It's not like now, when you're of marriageable age, you don't even have a reliable matchmaker. It's not your own extravagance. Speaking of this, Wen Shu was very dissatisfied and said, What's wrong? They're useless, but they're blaming me. She turned around and hung the handkerchief back on the wooden frame next to her, muttering softly. Grandpa Wen sighed helplessly and said, Oh, you're like this. I can't rest assured even when I close my eyes. Pooh, what's Dad talking nonsense all this morning? Your spring and autumn are in full swing, and you will definitely live 100 years longer. Hurry up and give up this unlucky words. Wen's father stared at her for a while, until Wen Shu's face stiffened with a smile. It was only then that he spoke up, This is the only time, let's not do it again. He then turned around and returned to his room. Upon hearing these words, Wen Shu responded with great joy, as if granted amnesty. He quickly poured out the water from the basin and ran towards the kitchen, only to turn it back halfway. He poked his head and asked, Dad, what would you like to eat this morning, tongue-skin noodles or steamed trowel head? At this moment, Mr. Wen was getting dressed by the bed, and upon hearing the words, he only said, You can do whatever you want. Just remember to dress up before going out, so that no one can tell. Oh, I got it. Wen Shu responded and took 3 steps and 2 steps into the kitchen. At the west corner of the kitchen, there were 2 small pumpkins the size of a palm. She casually picked one and placed it on the stove, using a polished knife to cut half of it, then peeled the skin and cut it into small pieces. I scooped out half a bowl of white rice and half a bowl of millet, from the rice jar, washed them clean, and then added water to the pot to boil. On this side, I continued to scoop out a spoonful of wheat flour and knead it evenly. 2/4 of an hour later, she brought a basin of South Claw congee, 6 vermicelli mantou and 2 plates of pickles to the wooden table in the yard. At this moment, the sun had already risen and hung diagonally in the east. The street ahead also began to liven up, with faint sounds of vendors shouting. Wen Shu arranges the dishes and puts a bowl of congee for her father. As soon as she is about to ask him to open the shop door in front of her for dinner, she hears a familiar cry outside the door. Selling pancakes. Vegetable cakes, meat cakes, and hibiscus cakes, mantou, plain mantou, wrapped steamed mantou, sugar and meat mantou. Wen Shu glanced at the table and saw that her father had not turned back yet. After thinking for a moment, he took out a few copper coins from his sleeve, opened the side door of the courtyard, and poked his head out, saying, Zhang, come and have 2 cooked meat cakes. Okay, the vendor surnamed Zhang immediately ran over and skillfully wrapped 2 cooked meat cakes in oil paper, handing them over. He smiled and said, Thank you for your 4-1. Here. Wen Shu took out the copper he had already prepared and handed it to him. The vendor smiled and took it, saying, Thank you, madam. After buying the pancake, Wen Shu turned around and closed the door. She saw her father coming to the backyard and quickly approached, saying, Dad, come quickly. The Zhang family meat pancake we just bought is still hot. Wen Tai glanced at the table and saw that there were mantou and congee on the table. He said, You can eat them. I can eat them. That's not possible. Wen Shu Bai took out a cake and handed it to him. I bought 2, 1 for each of us. Grandpa Wen shook his head and said, No, it's all for you. If you're going out to work this afternoon, why don't you eat enough so you don't have nowhere to find food when you're hungry? Dad, don't worry. When we go out to work, our master will also send food, so we won't be hungry. Grandpa Wen shook his head and said, Listen to me. This time, it's not like before. Even if you eat less, don't argue with others. If you cause trouble, don't blame me. If it weren't for already agreeing that it would be difficult for him to retract, Wen Tai wouldn't have let his daughter do this job. Seeing her father's face not looking good, Wen Shu knew what he was worried about and quickly raised his hand to promise, almost swearing to the heavens, "Dad, don't worry, I will be careful and not let anyone see through." "I hope so." Wen Tai shook his head helplessly and sat down at the table. Wen Shu took advantage of his carelessness and quickly tore the meat patty in his hand into small pieces and threw it into his bowl. Wen Tai was about to bow down and drink congee, but she didn't expect that she would come. When she got the reaction, there were several more meat cakes in congee. Looking up again, the girl next to him had already sat across from him, looking at him with a smile and munching on the meat patty. Wen Tai had no choice but to pick up the cake and take a bite, saying, "When buying groceries tomorrow, go to Zhouji to buy some pork and come back." Wen Shu, who was still chewing on the cake in his mouth, heard his eyes brighten and said vaguely, "All right, does Dad want to have a dumpling soup or red crispy meat tomorrow?" "Red crispy pork." "Okay, then when I get back from work, I'll go to the butcher's shop and take a look. I'm not sure if there's anything left unsold today. Could it be cheaper?" "Well, you can handle this as you please." The father and daughter were eating breakfast while chatting about their family background. After finishing breakfast and washing the dishes, the sun had already risen to the sky. With half an hour left until the agreed time, Wen Shu quickly rushed into the room and cursed at the bronze mirror. "First, put down the hair that was casually curled up in the morning and comb it back together. Tie it with a cloth of the same color, then use an eyebrow strip to thicken the delicate eyebrows, making the eyebrows and eyes look more youthful. Then, apply a light gray powder mixed with fragrant ink and lead powder on the face, and the fair and rosy skin will instantly turn yellow and dark." After the twists and turns of combing, painting, and wiping, the girl who was originally graceful immediately transformed into a simple and capable rural boy. After doing all of this well, Wen Shu lowered her head and looked at the breasts that were most likely to reveal her gender. She couldn't help but smile smugly, so having a small chest is not completely useless. At least at this point, she can pretend to be real without having to wrap her chest, which means she needs to change her neighbor Linger. Thinking of the handkerchief he had grown up with since childhood, Wen Shu exclaimed. After carefully taking photos in front of the copper realm for a long time, it was confirmed that except for the ear holes that could not be completely blocked and could only be slightly concealed with lead powder, everything else was impeccable. Only then did I straighten my shirt and go out. "Hi everyone, Xiaogu is opening a new book." The background and style of the new book are roughly based on the Northern Song dynasty. However, due to the lack of solid historical knowledge, although a large amount of information has been consulted, there are still fears of errors, omissions, and negligence. To avoid misleading everyone, this article still adopts an elevated background. Everyone should read it as the Great Song Dynasty in a parallel space. The article will not involve real historical figures, so please do not delve into it. P.S. New book period. Please vote more, collect more, invest more, click more. Love you all. Reading tips. In fact, Mantu in the Northern Song dynasty was called cooking cake. Yes, it was the cooking cake sold by Wu Dalong. But for the sake of understanding and memory, I'd like to use the familiar Mantu. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. For Departments and 6 Bureaus. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 3. Rescue Screen. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Rescue Screen. Half a quarter of an hour later, the banquet officially opened. Under the corridor not far from the screen, Wen Shu leaned against the pillar, eating the green fruits sent by the maid sent by the master's family. Just as he wanted to sigh sweetly, he heard a faint voice coming from behind the rockery on his right side. "Hey, do you see that? That's Lu Shaoqing. He's really young and promising." "Yeah, it looks like my brother hasn't grown up yet. Wen Shu turned his head and saw several maids from the imperial palace gathering together to chat. One of them was the red-clothed maid who had just brought her fruit. Of course, I heard that Lu Datsai has just weakened his crown. How old is your brother? His words were somewhat disdainful. The mocked maid chuckled and didn't get angry, sighing, my older brother can't compare to Lu Shaoqing. When he was his age, he was making a fuss about marrying his sister. Law. Unlike Lu, who sat in the position of the young minister of Dali Temple at a young age, he will surely achieve great success in the future and have an unlimited future. Oh, from what you're saying, I think you still want to be the young lady. The maid in green blushed and whispered, Sister, don't make fun of me. I dare not even think about what identity Lu Shaoqing is, what identity I am, or even being a concubine. You still have some self-awareness, the red-clothed maid smiled and said, Lu Shaoqing comes from the noble marquis's mansion. His wife must also be a high-ranking official and a noble lady in the future. It's better not to have any illusions about our status. What my sister said is that we don't have such daydreams, but Lord Lu is also pitiful. Although he came from the Ho mansion, he didn't occupy half of the Ho mansion's income. When he was lacking in shade, he only received the lowest 8-level evaluation. Now, he has been promoted 4 levels in 2 years, relying solely on his own abilities to climb up. As Wen Shu ate the fruit and listened to gossip, he had an additional evaluation of Lu Shaoqing in front of the screen in his heart. Really a badass. It's not easy to be promoted 4 levels in a row between 2 years in this capital filled with officials. Without mentioning the whispers of the maids or the thoughts of the onlooker Wen Shu, at this moment, Lu Yuanqing at the table was pondering what kind of excuse to find later, avoiding everyone's gaze and searching for the list of offerings in the backyard. Looking at the simple courtyard, he lowered his head to drink and a cold smile quietly flashed across the corner of his mouth. Who would have known that Wang Yushe, known for his honesty and neutrality in dealing with the world, was actually a member of the left prime minister's faction and a powerful assistant behind his extreme extravagance and desire to accumulate wealth. If it weren't for a lifetime of rebirth at this moment, a hint of coldness flashed in his eyes, and his hand holding the wine glass couldn't help but tighten. Just as he was about to crush his wine glass, Wang Yushe, who was toasting at the front table, finally turned around and raised his glass with a smile, saying, Your Excellency, as soon as your injury healed, I took the time to congratulate you. Wang is really embarrassed. Today, I will use this thin wine to offer you a toast. Young Qing, please. Upon hearing the sound, Lu Yuanqing could only restrain his emotions and stood up to raise his glass. With a gentle smile, he said, Your Excellency, you are welcome. Please. Wang Yushe put his glass close to his lips and drank it all in one gulp, then lit it up and said, I'll fill it up. Your injury has just healed, but there's no need to force it. It's better to do whatever you want. Lu Yuanqing nodded and pressed his wine glass to his lips. The pale yellow liquid in the glass shimmered, and at that moment, he suddenly had a plan in mind. At the next moment, everyone saw him tilt and stumble as the screen on his right hand fell over. At the same time, the wine glass also fell off his hand and made a crisp sound of broken porcelain on the bluestone slab. This scene happened in the midst of lightning and fire. It was not surprising that Wang Yushe, who was only a table away from him, did not react. Even Zhang Dushe, who was drinking with him at the same table, could only watch him fall towards the screen. The only one present who reacted and made a timely response was Wen Shu, who was not far behind and kept a close eye on this side, fearing that the screen would malfunction and he would be held accountable. Seeing that valuable screen about to go wrong, Wen Shu's whole heart almost jumped out of his chest in an instant. The instinctive reaction of the body was faster than that of the brain, and it rushed forward like the wind. As Lu Yuanqing was about to lean against the screen, he bent his elbow against his waist with one hand and supported the shaky screen with the other. However, in this way, both sides of the force were pressed against each other at the same time, even though she was too proud, her knees couldn't help but soften and she knelt down on the ground. And her actions, however, let Lu Yuanqing's calculations fall through, and her face couldn't help but turn a little black in shock at the moment. Who is so foolish and bad about him? He thought to himself, but when he peeked, he found himself lying on the person's side, unable to see his face clearly from his feet. He could only see a shiny black head and a snow-white neck exposed outside his collar, especially a hint of crimson on it, which instantly left him completely stunned. This birthmark Lu Yuanqing's face was filled with suspicion and uncertainty. As he was about to ponder, Wang Yushe and others on this side finally reacted and rushed to help him, shouting loudly. They kept asking, "Your Excellency, are you okay?" Seeing this situation, Lu Yuanqing, who was interrupted in his thinking, simply resorted to strategy and pretended to be weak and powerless, supported by them. He also secretly used his martial arts skills to make his face pale a bit. Wang Yushe saw that his face was not good and said with concern, "Your Excellency is feeling unwell. Should I send someone to invite a doctor?" "No need." Lu Wuchen waved his hand weakly, "It's just a little dizzy. I just wanted to take a break for a while, but it was impolite to disturb the adults' wedding banquet." What the Lord said. This is Wang's fault. He forgot that the Lord's injury has just healed. He should pay more attention. "It's not my fault, sir. It was my own carelessness." After speaking, Lu Yuanqing supported the table with one hand and turned to Wen Shu behind him, feeling weak. "Thank you very much for your help just now, little brother. I don't know how to address you." At this moment, Wen Shu had just stood up with the help of Li Qing, rubbing his slightly sore wrist. Hearing this, he couldn't help but shudder, as if he didn't expect this adult to pay attention to her. After hesitating for a while, he said in a slow voice, "My surname is Wen. What happened just now was just a small gesture. It shouldn't be a big deal, adults don't need to worry." She spoke in a formal manner, but Lu Yuanqing took this opportunity to look at her openly. When his gaze fell on her earlobe, he saw that there was indeed a slightly invisible little eye on it, so he couldn't help but speculate more confidently in his heart. At this moment, Wang Yushe beside him spoke up and said, "Your Excellency is feeling unwell. It's better to sit down and rest. This young brother's bravery in saving people deserves a reward." He then called his attendant and asked him to go and collect the red seal. Wen Shu didn't expect such unexpected joy, and his eyes lit up. Even his sore left hand felt less pain. After instructing this side, Wang Yushe turned to Lu Yuanqing and said, "It's just that this place is noisy. Why don't we send someone to help Lord down and rest?" This sentence hit Lu Yuanqing's chest, and he immediately nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Lu Yuanqing was helped down, while the other guests continued to eat, still laughing and clamoring, without any change due to this incident. Meanwhile, Wen Shu, who continued to monitor in the corridor, also received a red seal handed over by the servants. She pinched it with her hand. The thin texture should be jiaozi, but the face value still needs to be open to see. Reading tip. Call this thing. According to data, the people of the Song dynasty referred to officials as officials rather than adults. In the Song dynasty, adults meant father, and it was not until the Yuan dynasty that they became the term for officials. However, deeply influenced by TV dramas, we have become accustomed to listening to adults, and suddenly changing to officials feels uncomfortable. Think about it, if Lord Lu turns into an official, do you think it would be pleasant? So Xiaogu continued to use the familiar term adult. There are also self-proclaimed women. During the Song dynasty, women generally referred to themselves as slaves or concubines. For example, "I am a servant and a concubine." I personally don't think it sounds good. I don't know what everyone thinks. Feel free to leave a comment in the comments section, and I will follow the opinions of most readers. P.S. New book period, seeking collection, seeking recommendations. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Cooked water for beam stems. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Cooked water for beam stems. Li Qing, who was admiring and grateful, said, "Thanks to your quick reaction just now, otherwise the screen would have gone wrong, and we would have had to have a meal of hanging clothes when we go back." Wen Shu, who was guessing the face value of the red envelope, nodded in agreement. If it weren't for that, she wouldn't have reacted so quickly subconsciously. Although the things were damaged and the silly wouldn't demand full compensation from them, she still had to bear joint and several responsibilities, such as dismissal or monthly deductions. Although she came to work as a top worker and had no money to rely on in the office, it was impossible for the office to deduct her monthly salary. However, the tiger son who provided her with protection was rejected. As a result, she always maintains a strong spirit in her work, fearing that mistakes may affect others. Looking at Li Qing with a look of envy at the moment, Wen Shu's heart moved slightly. After hesitating for a moment, she quietly lifted the red seal and took out the jiaozi inside, only to find that it was 5 sheets of 200 won, totaling a total of 100 yuan. After thinking for a moment, she took out 2 from inside and handed them to Li Qingdao. "Brotherly, this is for you." Li Qing didn't expect her to do such a thing. He was so shocked that he took several steps back and shook his head, saying, "What is brother Wen doing?" Wen Shu smiled and said, "Today, I will guard this screen with brotherly. If we neglect our duty, neither of us can escape punishment. Since we both prosper and suffer, we should also share the reward with brotherly." "No, no, no," Li Qing shook her head hastily. "It was all thanks to you alone who saved the adults today. I haven't even put in any effort, how can I take the money? Besides, if it weren't for your quick reaction and the screen malfunctioning, I would have had to eat a hanging bowl when I went back. Now that the screen is fine, it has already been stained with your light. How could I lick my face and ask for your silver again?" Seeing him say so, Wen Shu didn't force himself either. He smiled and withdrew a note, then inexplicably pushed the remaining one into his hand. Today's red seal is really an unexpected joy. The boy used to get a lot of care from elder brotherly. This money is a token of my heart. What's more, today's imperial palace is hosting a full moon banquet, and elder brotherly shared the money and shared his joy. Who wouldn't love to hear such beautiful words, let alone Wen Shu's words, which are about to reach Li Qing's heart? He is in his 20s and has been married for 2 years now, but his mother has not given birth to a son or a half-daughter for him. His mother anxiously murmured at home every day about going to incense, and he couldn't help but feel a little anxious as he listened. Now that Wen Shu had said these words, he felt it was a good omen and would quickly accept the money. "Cheng, then I'll borrow your auspicious words. If there is anything I can help with in the future, just let me know. If I can help, I won't refuse." "Oh, thank you very much for taking care of Li Gu," Wen Shu happily agreed, but in fact, he had another thought in his heart. She has been the top worker of Wang Ji's 4th Division as a guarantor by Huzi for 7 or 8 times, and although she has dealt with this Li Gu several times, her friendship is not deep. Now, taking advantage of this excuse, firstly, I want to see if this Li Gu is a greedy and ungrateful person, and whether he deserves deep friendship. Secondly, I also have some intention of pleasing him. Isn't it said that money can test people's hearts the most? She disguised herself as a man and came out to make a living. Although she was well dressed, there were inevitably moments when she had 100 secrets. At present, she took good care of her people's hearts and only hoped that one day when there was a leak, these people she usually interacted with could recite their past feelings, show mercy, and show some kindness. Fortunately, the result was not bad. Li Gu is not someone who is open-minded about money. Thinking of this, Wen Shu felt very relieved. In the afternoon, after handing over the handover with Manager Li, Wen Shu took the newly received 80 Wen salary and the remaining 800 Wen gift money as a reward from the imperial censor Wang, and ran back to the Coffin shop. Before entering the shop, she carefully looked outside the door for a while and saw that only her father buried his head in chopping wood, and there were no outsiders. She then stepped in and called out to her father. Wen Tai was in a hurry to finish his work, but he didn't raise his head when he heard the sound and said, "I'm back. Go wash your hands. In the kitchen, I left you some boiled water." Upon hearing the cooked water, Wen Shu immediately smiled and said, "Dad, how did you know I was thirsty? After a busy afternoon, how could I not be thirsty? Go and wash my face along the way," Wen Tai urged. "Oh, I got it." Wen Shu responded and rushed towards the backyard with a bouncing gait. When she arrived at the backyard, she first went to the room and put the wages and gifts in her arms into the pottery jar under the bed. Then, she counted them carefully and confirmed that they were correct. Only then did she go to the well to fetch water, wash her face, and wash her hands with satisfaction. If we were to say that today was really a day of joy, carefully calculate. Now that she has the silver money in her hand and what she just got today, she has saved almost half of it. With this progress, I think she can work hard for another 2 or 3 months to help her father buy back that pair of waist protectors. Thinking of her father's waist injury, Wen Shu couldn't help feeling a pang of guilt. If it weren't for her playfulness and running to the roof to pick up keys 3 years ago, her father would have been afraid of her falling and rushed over to catch her, so he wouldn't have stepped on the moss by the well and injured his waist. Since then, on rainy and cold days, her father's waist injury will recur, ranging from mild soreness and pain to severe inability to get out of bed. She couldn't bear to see him. She once took him to see all the medical institutions in Bianjing, but in the end, she only came to the conclusion that he couldn't recover and could only slowly recover. Ku's family is engaged in the sushi business, and in order to make a living, his father cannot be idle. He bends down to make coffins every day, and over the years, his waist injury has become even more severe. She finally found out that jishitang in the south of the city has a type of waist protection that has a nourishing effect on the body when worn on weekdays, and can also alleviate pain when a waist injury occurs. However, the price is a bit expensive, costing 3 guan yuan, and the inner core needs to be replaced every 6 months, which is consistent with the cost. She turned around and told her father about it, but he refused to accept it and even said it was a scam. He said he had spare money, so it was better to save it for her dowry. She tried to persuade her several times but was unsuccessful. Helpless, she had to disguise herself and go out to take care of the work, thinking of saving some private property to secretly buy it back for her father. At that time, he could never take it back. Thinking that he was getting closer and closer to that goal, Wen Shu couldn't help but feel overjoyed. After washing his hands and face clean, he returned to his room and changed back to his daughter's daily attire. He then combed his hair back into a normal style before slowly walking towards the kitchen. In the southwest corner of the kitchen, a small stove half a foot high is adorned with a brown pottery jar, and at this moment, the vent of the jar lid is bubbling hot air out. Wen Shu approached and lifted the lid. Suddenly, a warm air enveloped her face with the fragrance of rice. Seeing the cooked water in the pottery jar full, she thought that her father might not have drunk it yet. So she took out 2 large porcelain bowls from the cupboard and scooped a spoonful of sugar from the bamboo bucket next to it, stirring it well. She then took 1 bowl at a time and went to the front shop. "Dad, stop and drink a bowl of cooked water to quench your thirst." "Oh, Anning is here. I didn't go to school today." Beside the shop door, a thin and frail middle-aged man holding a sack filled with wooden flowers stopped to greet Wen Shu. "Uncle's son," Wen Shu shouted and quickly handed over the cooked water in his hand. "Tomorrow is the day. Uncle has just arrived at the right time. The freshly boiled Lianggan cooked water is still hot. Uncle, please have a bowl to warm your stomach." The man waved his hand repeatedly and said, "No, no, it's at home. Home is home. Uncle, try my families and see if there are any differences." "That's right, there's nothing to recommend for a bowl of cooked water. There's still plenty left in the kitchen, hurry up and drink it," Wen Tai helped out, taking the cooked water from Wen Shu's hand. Sun Heping and Wen Shu were very familiar with each other, and when they heard this, they didn't show much courtesy and took it with a smile. "Thank you, Anning. Yesterday, your aunt said that the weather has been good lately and we need to prepare moldy tofu. When it's ready, I'll make some for you to taste." "Hey, that's kind of you. Auntie made moldy tofu, but it's a masterpiece. No one knows the whole alley. If you ask me, if Auntie makes some and sells it in the market, she can definitely make money." The man was amused and burst into laughter, then shook his head helplessly and said, "I do think it's just that your aunt's body is good enough to make your own food, but if you make too much, you can't afford to sell it." Thinking of Aunt Sun's body that could catch her breath even after taking a few quick steps, Wen Shu could only comfort her, saying, "It will get better. Aunt's illness is not a serious illness. Take good care of yourself, and one day you will recover." "I hope so." Sun Heping sighed and handed the bowl he had finished drinking back to Wen Shu. "I have also drunk the tea and packed the wooden flowers. Your lady is still waiting for me to go back and clean the wooden cage for her, so I'll leave first." "Okay, Uncle often comes to play when he has free time." New book period, seeking collection and receiving recommendations. Reading tip. Cooked water was the most commonly consumed beverage among the people of the Song dynasty, similar to modern herbal tea. It involves roasting various edible spices, soaking them in boiling water, and creating a unique flavor. Different spices can produce different types of ripe water, such as perilla soaked in it called perilla ripe water, cardamom soaked in it called cardamom ripe water, and flowers soaked in it called fragrant flower ripe water. The Lianggan cooked water mentioned in the article was the most popular cooked water at that time. The method was to take a bundle of rice straw hearts, wash them, dry them in the sun, rinse them in boiling water a few times, and a pot of Lianggan cooked water would be ready. Although the ingredients are simple, there is a rice aroma when smelling and drinking. If the taste is too light, you can add some sugar or honey. In the big cities of the Song dynasty, even on the late nights of winter, there were vendors setting up stalls selling hot boiled water made of liang stalks for night shift workers to drink. The prices were very affordable, costing 32 won per bowl. The approach is to, end of this chapter. Chapter 5. Night Fire. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 6. Out of Control. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Out of Control. At the same time, Weiyuan Hofu. Outside the study, Lushu looked at the sky and saw that it was already dark. The study door was still tightly closed, without any movement. After hesitating for a moment, he finally stepped forward and knocked on the door. "Young master." Inside the room, Lu Yuanqing, who had been sitting all night, regained his senses and was taken aback by the bright sky outside the window. After a moment, he asked, "What time is it?" "Young Master Hui, it's just past the beginning of Mao." Lu Shi replied from outside. Upon hearing this, Lu Yuanqing rubbed his sore forehead and stood up. He walked around to the table and said in a low voice, "Come in." Upon receiving the order, Lu Shi quickly signaled to the maids behind him to follow and push the door in first. The maids behind him, holding water basins and clothes, followed closely behind him. In a moment, Lu Yuanqing was being groomed by his maids, but his mind was still thinking about yesterday. Yesterday, he took the opportunity to stay at the imperial palace for a few hours, during which he also avoided servants and went to the study to investigate, but found nothing. The list that shocked the court and the public 3 years later is not currently in the imperial palace. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but furrow his brow deeply. Seeing this, Lu Shi on the side said with concern, "Young master, what's the trouble? Rebirth is a big secret, and besides, this matter is too complicated." Even though Lu Shi is his confidant, Lu Yuanqing doesn't intend to speak it out. He just said calmly, I've thought about something. By the way, how did you do what I ordered you to do yesterday?" Lu Shi immediately replied, "Young Master Hui, I have already made a thorough inquiry. However, that Wen Xiaolang is not a regular employee of the 4th Division of Wang Ji, but a substitute worker recommended by acquaintances. He is listed in Wang Ji's employment book and does not have a detailed record of his specific address. He only roughly knows that he lives in the north of the city. Then find the person who can hire him as a substitute. Lu Yuanqing straightened his sleeves. The villain also thought the same way. He had already searched for that house yesterday, but unfortunately, that house happened to be out. I was just planning to go again today. Lu Yuanqing nodded and looked out the window, saying, I have been keeping an eye on this matter. Please report it as soon as you find your residence. Yes, Lu Shi respectfully agreed. At this point, when Lu Yuanqing saw the green bricks outside slightly damp and the leaves lush, he couldn't help but be stunned for a moment and muttered to himself, is it raining? Lu Shi, who was standing beside him, thought it was a question and quickly said, yes, it has rained for a quarter of an hour. Fortunately, the rain came in time, otherwise the sky fire in the north of the city would have affected many people. Upon hearing this, Lu Yuanqing's hand, which was tidying up the cuffs, gave a fierce thud and exclaimed in shock, what are you talking about? The north of the city is flooded. Lu Shi didn't know why he was so excited, so he felt a little uneasy and said, yes, it said that the fire was quite intense. The fire brigade tried their best to extinguish it for nearly an hour, but still burned down more than 40 or 50 houses. After listening, Lu Yuanqing frowned tightly, and at the same time, a heart in his chest also jumped rapidly. Why doesn't he remember a fire in the north of the city in the 32nd year of the Heavenly Saint's reign? Yesterday I got nothing at the Imperial Palace, and now there has been an unexpected natural disaster. What exactly went wrong? Thinking of this, he felt a sense of crisis inexplicably in his heart. It turns out that not everything can be controlled even after being reborn and returning in Xiaoqiao Lane, when Tai was cleaning up the accumulated water in the low-lying areas of the courtyard while sighing repeatedly as he looked at the burnt black shop. Wen Shu moved a small square stool and sat by the well, washing all the pots, pans, and ladles that were brought out of the kitchen one by one, while calculating the loss and the amount of silver needed for replacement in his heart. Outside the door, the sound of the vendors' cries came in clearly. Trowel. Newly steamed fish mantou, wrapped steamed mantou, kai bing, ro bing, and fu rong bing are all freshly cooked. Selling soup, we have everything from cardamom soup to air-breaking soup, Yuzhen soup, and mint. Wen Shu heard some unfamiliar cries that he had never heard before and thought to himself, today is even more lively than before. After a moment of reflection, it became clear that 8 out of 10 households in the alley have been affected by the disaster. This early morning, it is estimated that no one will have the mood to make breakfast. After hearing about the vendors outside, they will surely spend money to buy a meal and settle their stomachs first. With this in mind, she felt the emptiness in her belly, so she put down her work, opened the gate, and waved to a vendor selling mantou outside the gate. Brother, do you have vegetarian mantou? Some, how many young ladies do you want? The vendor eagerly pushed the small car over. When Shulu pondered and replied, 4. Haole. The peddler stopped the car steadily, took out a piece of oil paper neatly, picked up 4 plain trowels and put them on, then asked. I still have the sweet mantou that little ladies like best. Would you like to add 2 more? Wen Shu politely shook his head. No, I'm tired of eating meat these days, so I want to eat some vegetarian food. Then he handed the vendor 2 won for buying mantou. Turning around and closing the courtyard door, she said to Wen Tai, who was cleaning the accumulated water in the courtyard, Dad, let's have some food first. Let's do it later. Upon hearing this, Wen Tai put down his broom and walked over. He got up in the middle of the night to put out the fire and was busy all morning. His stomach was already hungry. After receiving the steamed bun from Wen Shu, he said with a slightly stunned face, Why mantou? Don't you like eating Zhang's meat cakes best? As he spoke, he broke open the trowel and said, It's still unfilled. Wen Shu said sorrowfully, this time is different from the past. Our shop has just suffered a disaster, and we don't know how much silver it will cost to rebuild it in the future. Saving 1 penny at this time is worth 1 penny. Wen Tai shook his head repeatedly, but he didn't say anything at the moment. The father and daughter stood at the stone table and ate up the 2 palm-sized mantou in the wet and cold air. Eating too early, the father and daughter continued to do the unfinished work. After finishing all the cleaning work, the 2 of them gathered together and began to take stock of the things lost in the fire at home. Finally, they made 2 long lists, which were recorded by Wen Shu and later bought back at the market. After roughly estimating the prices on the 2 lists, Wen Shu's already worried face wrinkled together in an instant. San Guan Qian. It's not easy to earn some silver in this world, but it's like flowing water. He said angrily and slapped the order on the table. Wen Tai shook his head and sighed, then took the list from the table and said, the official regulations have not been finalized yet. I have nothing to do today, so let me handle the procurement work. You still have to go to school next afternoon, so take advantage of your free time to review and study more. Thinking of spending the silver like flowing water, Wen Shu Ben nodded with an indifferent mind. As soon as Wen Tai left, Wen Shu looked at the courtyard and found that there was not much work to do, so he went back to his room to study according to his words. New book, Seeking Recommendation Tickets, Seeking Collection, end of this chapter. Chapter 7. Mysterious Inquiries. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Mysterious Inquiries. In a moment, a simple yet somewhat cautious shout came from the half-closed courtyard door. Wen Shu, Wen Shu. The voice was so familiar that Wen Shu didn't need to look to know who it was. He poked his head out of the window and casually called out, "Come in, my dad's not here." The tall and thin man standing outside the courtyard seemed somewhat uneasy upon hearing this. He looked inside for a while, but only breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Wen Tai was not inside. He stepped into the door. Wen Shu put down his book and welcomed him out, saying, "Why did you come over? Have you finished your household? My parents and sister-in-law are still busy, so my mother asked me to come out and buy things. Why are you coming to me instead of buying?" Huzi looked around and whispered, "I have something to tell you, boss." Did you provoke someone outside? Boss is a unique term used by Huzi to refer to Wen Shu, and it is also a rule established by Wen Shu when he was a child and made Huzi cry and call his mother for the first time. What nonsense! What can I provoke? Wen Shu glared at him. Huzi glanced at her with disbelief and said, "Don't hide it from me. The people from Weiyuan Marquis' mansion came over just now." Weiyuan Marquis' mansion. Wen Shu hesitated for a moment, then looked at him strangely and said, "What are the people of Weiyuan Marquis' mansion looking for you for?" "What are you looking for?" "They're here to inquire about you." Huzi rolled his eyes. "Inquire about me?" Wen Shu hesitated for a moment and said strangely, "I don't know any Weiyuan Marquis' mansion. What are his servants asking about me?" "That person didn't say anything, but he even asked me about your place of residence. Are you really not causing trouble?" Speaking of which, Huzi looked at her with a worried expression. "No, what can I cause?" Wen Shu waved his hand. "Do you know anyone from the Marquis' mansion in Weiyuan?" "I don't know." "So what did they inquire about you?" "You ask me about this, I still want to know." Wen Shu rolled his eyes and then his body was taken aback, asking, "Did you tell me where I live?" Huzi lowered his head in frustration and said, "That." I didn't want to say anything, but later he revealed the sign of the Marquis' mansion. Wen Shu understood his difficulties and was not angry at the moment, and he was able to take a detour to tell her, which was already intentional. "All right, I didn't blame you again. Thank you for coming to tell me. If there's nothing else, you'd better leave quickly. My dad is coming back soon." Huzi came this time to inform her, so as not to let anyone secretly calculate. Now, he didn't hesitate to say anything and just joked a few times before leaving. After he left, Wen Shu was seriously thinking about it. She knew that Huzi would never make up such a story to tease her, but the Duke of Weiyuan's mansion staring for a moment, she suddenly had a flash of inspiration. By the way, yesterday I heard those maids say that Lu Shaoqing seems to be from the Marquis' mansion. Is it this Weiyuan Marquis' mansion? It should be, otherwise she wouldn't know anyone from the other Marquis' mansion anymore. Why did that Lu Shaoqing send someone to inquire about her residence? If we talk about gratitude, yesterday the imperial censor Wang had already given him a silver reward, so it should be said that this matter has been resolved. After thinking for a moment, she couldn't figure out anything, so she simply threw it away and went back to her room to continue studying. Just as he raised his eyes, he unexpectedly met the iron box on the bedside table and couldn't help but pause for a moment. The next moment, she turned around and walked to the bedside table to pick up the strange iron box. The walls of the iron box are engraved with many flowers, birds, fish, insects, and birds and animals, while the cover and base are engraved with blue sky, white clouds, and high mountains and lakes. Overall, Wen Shu feels like a condensed small world engraved on it. After a moment of contemplation, a hint of doubt flashed in her heart. Where exactly did this thing, which looked like a coffin, come from? If it was accidentally lost by a customer who has been to her shop, it seems unlikely. Not to mention that the exquisite texture and patterns on it are not something that ordinary people can make. Even if someone can make it, they will carry it with them, not afraid of bad luck. Fingers caressed the iron box for a moment, and as Wen Shu looked at the inconspicuous gap between the top and bottom of the box, his mind moved and he thought to himself. Can this box still be opened? What will be installed on the head here? Curious, I couldn't help but want to push open the iron cover and take a look, but my hand reached halfway and then withdrew. No way. This thing is not from her family. If she opened it without permission, wouldn't it be peeping into someone else's privacy? Master once said, do not look or listen unless you are polite. After hesitating for a moment, she thought, forget it, let's wait a little longer. The occurrence of such a big fire in the north of the city will surely be known to the entire Tokyo city in less than a day. No matter who accidentally lost something while passing by, after hearing this, one will definitely wake up and come back to find it. If it had been a month or so, no one would have paid attention to this item, and it wouldn't be too late for her to open it again. Having made up his mind, Wen Shu restrained his curiosity and turned back to his desk to continue studying. Just as Wen En sat down for a while, the wooden door of the small courtyard creaked again, and then her father's panting voice came. Anning, come and give me a hand. Upon hearing the sound, Wen Shu quickly put down her book and ran out. As soon as she left, she saw her father carrying a lot of things on his shoulders and back, the most prominent of which was the 70.80-pound large face pocket on his shoulder. She quickly stepped forward and took it, muttering, Dad just needs to tell the rice shop if he wants weak noodles. They will send someone to bring them. Why bother carrying them back like this? Be careful not to hurt your waist again. Wen Tai shook his hand and said, It's okay, I have a plan in mind. The rice shop is crowded today, and the shopkeeper said he may not have time to deliver it before noon. I thought the white noodles in the jar were not enough to make a meal of watered meat noodles, so I decided to carry them back on my own. The food at home has always been managed by Wen Shu, and she naturally knows how many noodles are left at home. However, when she heard her father say to make watered meat noodles at noon, she couldn't help but exclaim, Dad, you're buying meat. Wen Tai smiled and magically pulled out a piece of pork belly from the basket on the right. Yesterday we agreed to buy meat today, he said. Wen Shu naturally remembers this matter. It was just a sudden disaster at home last night, causing a disaster in the shop. It would cost an unknown amount of money to rebuild it someday. Thinking of this, she dared not mention eating meat. Now that the meat was about to weigh 2 pounds, she couldn't help but feel heartbroken and say, Did we buy too much meat? We still need to save money to build the shop. Wen Tai chuckled and patted the flour on his body, saying, "Don't worry, save these 2 pounds of meat. We won't be able to build a shop either. Besides, you're still growing up at your age, so why don't you eat some good food?" He looked at her up and down, feeling quite disgusted and said, "I'm still a bit thin. People who come to see me strangely don't agree." After that, he sighed and walked towards the well. Standing in place, Wen Shu glanced at his slightly flat chest and felt black lines all over his head, which family's mother-in-law is chewing her tongue in front of her father. Although her family doesn't eat meat every day, the food is not too bad, and they can even have a meat meal every 3 to 5 days. Recently, she wanted to save money quickly to buy her father that pair of waist protectors, which led her to falsely claim that she had lost money on a circuit, so she didn't want to waste some meat money. Although her father really wanted to give her some more money to buy meat, he only thought that her dowry was still halfway off, so he stubbornly restrained the desire to eat meat. Anyway, I can't blame the lack of meat for not having a long chest. According to Aunt Lee's previous statement, it's impossible to say that this happened with her mother. It's just that her mother passed away early, and she doesn't even know what she looks like, so there's no way to verify it. Looking back at the red and white pork belly, although Wen Shu felt sorry for the silver, he hadn't eaten meat for 10.5 days, and his mouth became a bit greedy. Thinking that he had bought all the meat but couldn't return it, his mood changed and he happily took the bag of flour and meat back to the kitchen. As Wen Tai washed his hands, he looked up and saw the back of his daughter effortlessly carrying her white face pocket back to the kitchen. He sighed inwardly. If only this were a kid. With great strength, he can learn to make coffins. In the future, he will also make a living through his craft. However, he is a girl's family. Although he has great strength to defend himself, if he doesn't understand how to conceal it, it will be a bad thing. This girl was fine when she was young, and her strength was slightly stronger than that of other children of the same age, but to her surprise, as she grew older, her strength grew stronger. If we really want to compare now, I'm afraid we're even a bit stronger than him. Thinking of this, Wen Tai felt a headache. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Pouring Meat Noodles. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Pouring meat noodles. At present, the trend of thick marriage is prevalent. In ordinary households, when marrying a daughter, the dowry is at least 30 guan, and there is no upper limit. Therefore, when Anning was 3 years old, he began to save her dowry. 13 years have passed now, and I have some savings. However, when I spent 300 guan last year to build this shop, I only have less than 40 guan left in my hand. Due to the current emphasis on cultivating the culinary skills of the daughter's family, if a young lady from that family has exquisite culinary skills, she basically won't have to worry about the rest of her life. Not to mention being hired by a high-ranking and wealthy family to become a cook, the salary is generous, and even if she gets married, she will be looked up to by others in her husband's family. It would be even better if one could not only cook good tea and rice, but also read and write, or learn some poetry, calligraphy, and painting. However, those who can support their daughter's family to learn these things are usually from wealthy families, and the literary family is obviously not among them. Wen Tai pondered over his daughter's neglected marriage for half a month, feeling heartbroken. Finally, he gritted his teeth and spent 30 guan to send her to Jingzhen Academy in the north of the city, in order to teach her good cooking skills and to read more characters. In the future, when the matchmaker introduces each other, they can also look up a bit, which can not only marry a successful husband but also have a skill to support him. Even if he closes his eyes one day, he no longer needs to worry about the latter half of this child's life. He was secretly worried on his side, but Wen Shu in the kitchen had already rolled up his sleeves and started kneading noodles. Watering meat noodles, as the name suggests, is a natural way to water important scenes. However, Wen Shu thought that he had not eaten meat for nearly half a month, so since he had made the most of it, he naturally wanted to make it more delicious. In order to improve the taste of the noodles, she didn't hesitate to take out an egg from a bamboo basket suspended in mid-air and beat it in flour mixed with water. After kneading the eggs, water, and flour into a ball, set it aside to wake up, then pick up the piece of pork belly and wash it clean. Cut it into thin and medium pieces, and then start boiling oil. When the oil is hot, fry the dried Sichuan peppercorns until fragrant, then remove them and stir-fry the meat slices. When the surface of the meat slices is burnt yellow, add the chopped scallions, ginger, garlic, yellow wine, and soy sauce and stir-fry. After the meat slices are evenly colored, pour them into a washed clay pot on the side, and then place them on a small stove to slowly simmer over low heat. Add a few ladles of water to the waiting pot, and add some firewood to the stove. After a while, the fire will start to heat up. At this point, the noodles on the side were also about to wake up. The dough was taken out and placed on the cutting board, rolled out into large pieces with a rolling pin, and then cut into thin strips with a knife. When these were done, the water in the pot was just boiling. She put the cut noodles into a pot and boiled them. Taking advantage of this gap, she went to the jar in the corner of the kitchen to take the pickled radish and cut it into thin strips. After a cup of tea, 2 bowls of delicious and flavorful meat noodles were served by Wen Shu to the wooden table in the courtyard. Wen Tai had already smelled the aroma of meat coming from the kitchen. Seeing her come out now, she didn't need to say hello and washed her hands and sat at the table. Thick oil red sauce, the crispy and flavorful meat pieces are sprinkled with some green onions, with a burnt red color paired with emerald green. The color alone looks very pleasing, combined with neatly stacked pickled radishes next to it, making this bowl of Dutton noodles look extremely appetizing. Come on, Dad, give it a try and see if my skills have improved. Wen Shu handed the clean chopsticks to Wen Tai. Wen Tai took it and chewed a piece of meat carefully. After a while, he nodded slowly and said, "Not bad. It seems to be a bit more fresh and sweet than last time, and the taste is much softer and more sticky. Well, this is a new lesson taught by the kitchen lady in the school. She said adding some vinegar to stew meat can make it cook faster. She also said she wants to teach us how to make fish soup later today." Wen Tai nodded contentedly and said, "So it seems that those 30 guan have not been in vain. After studying for a few months, your culinary skills have indeed improved a lot." Upon hearing this, Wen Shu smiled proudly and said, "That's right. Your daughter is so smart, she knows how to learn." Wen Tai has long been accustomed to this kind of self-boasting, and he lowers his head to eat noodles without changing his color. Upon seeing this, Wen Shu couldn't help but swallow his saliva and didn't speak. He lowered his head and began to snore and eat noodles. In no time, the father and daughter ate 2 large bowls of watered noodles clean, and the bottom of the bowls was so clean that there was not even any soup left. After finishing the noodles, Mr. Wen walked to the neighboring uncle's house to discuss the reconstruction of the shop, while Mr. Wen Shu washed the dishes and went back to his room to take a nap. At this moment, there is less than an hour left before entering school in the afternoon. Taking a nap also saved her from feeling drowsy in class. She was grabbed by the teacher and used to play with her hands. As she thought about it, she let go of her hair and took off her coat. Just before falling asleep, my mind was still hazy thinking, I wonder how much silver the government can subsidize for this fire. When I fell asleep again, it was already late at the beginning, and the sky was still gloomy, with a continuous drizzle falling. Wen Shu got up and yawned, hung up the tent, got out of bed, put on his shoes, and walked to the east wardrobe. From inside, he took out an autumn fragrant embroidered mountain tea short jacket and a purple long skirt to replace them. This outfit is made of high-quality Hanchun Luo fabric. After entering school, her father was afraid that she would be ridiculed in school if she wore it poorly, so he spent 3 guan of money to buy it for her. In addition, there is a lotus-colored dress. Due to its value, she is reluctant to wear it at home. Only when she goes to school or occasionally has someone come to see her, will she put on clothes and put on a face. After putting on her dress, she took out a pair of silver red white plum embroidered shoes from under the wardrobe and put them on. Then, she walked to the dressing table to get a wooden comb, combed her hair that had fallen off during sleep, and tied a nearly fragrant bun on top of her head. When everything was done, a lively and beautiful little lady immediately appeared in the bronze mirror. After turning around and seeing that there was nothing wrong with his body, Wen Shu nodded satisfactorily and placed the books on the table in a nearby bamboo box. He then carried the bamboo box behind him, took the green cloth and oil paper umbrella behind the door, and went out. Breeze and drizzle, passing through alleys and entering households. She walked slowly in the drizzle wrapped in a gentle breeze, holding an oil paper umbrella. The broken walls on both sides emitted a burning smell, accompanied by the shouting from the street market ahead. Wen Shu stared intently at the ground, afraid that his newly worn satin embroidered shoes would be splashed by the mud and water on the ground. He couldn't walk at such a fast pace, but fortunately, the private school was not far away. It was still early, and even walking slowly, there was still enough time. After about 2 cups of tea, passing through 2 bustling streets and 3 narrow alleys, we arrived at Jingzhen Private School located by the Qingshui River. At this moment, less than 2/4 of an hour had passed before class, and outside the main gate, the little ladies carrying bamboo boxes entered in groups of 3 or 2. As soon as Wen Shu turned the corner of the alley, she heard someone calling her. She looked up and saw a little lady standing under the porch of the private school gate, stretching her neck to explore. Seeing her turn around the corner of the courtyard, she hurriedly raised her hand to greet her, with a bright smile on her face. "Sister Wen." Wen Shu smiled and agreed, took a few quick steps, collected his umbrella under the corridor, and asked, "Why did you come so early today?" Reading tip. In the Song Dynasty, the usual amount of money was equivalent to 1,000 won. According to historical records, the average street vendor in Tokyo earned about 30 guan per year. An adult laborer earns approximately 100 won a day. During the Song Dynasty, the housing prices in Tokyo were extremely high. It is said that many officials below the 7th grade could not afford to buy a house and could only rent a place to live. The setting here in Xiaogu is that although the housing prices are equally high, officials can still have a house, just the quality of the house and the location. But ordinary vendors and residents still tend to rent more houses. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Jingzhen Private School. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Jingzhen Private School. The little lady who summoned people, all named Qin Shan, was Wen Shu's desk mate. She was 15 years old and her home was in Guanhua Lane, not far from here. She didn't even need half a cup of tea when she walked by, so she basically pinched and ordered it every day. For this reason, Wen Shu once teased her, saying that she was just the name. Shan came late. I couldn't help but be surprised to see her come so early today. When there were unwanted guests at home, they avoided it. Qin Shan pouted, her face somewhat gloomy. Wen Shu thought for a moment and said, "But your third cousin. It's not just him." Qin Shan scolded angrily, "I lick my face every day and I don't know what I want to do. Unfortunately, my mother is more and more satisfied with him, and even wants to marry me to him." The third cousin of Qin Shan, Wen Shu, knew that because Qin Shan had been with her several times, and in summary, she was honest and plain-looking. The only advantage may be that she was a close match to the Qin family's family background. Qin Shan's family is considered to be above average in the northern part of the city. They have 2 grocery stores, and her third cousin's family is also good, running a horse and carriage shop. In fact, in Wen Shu's opinion, Qin Shan's third cousin has decent qualifications, at least there are no major flaws in character. Ordinary people usually look for a husband based on this standard, only pitifully showing up with Qin Shan, a girl who looks at her face, which is why she is demoted to nothing. However, as an outsider, she didn't say much about this matter. At the moment, she could only change the topic and pull her sleeve, saying, "It's getting late, let's go first." Qin Shan didn't take this matter too seriously, she just spoke out to vent her anger. Upon hearing this, she immediately smiled and said, "Yes, yes. I heard that Lady Ji wants us to teach fish soup today. I tried it at home yesterday, but the fishy smell can't be eliminated. I happened to ask her today." As they spoke, the two of them walked hand in hand into the private school. Jingzhen Private School is located by the Qingshui River and is a famous women's private school in the north of the city. The Song Dynasty was established for 200 years, and under the diligent efforts of several emperors, the country has now reached a state of prosperity and strength. In this prosperous environment, not only can men freely enter and exit the court to work, but women can also compete for a place in this bustling area. People in Tokyo love to enjoy it, and the food they eat is even more indispensable every day, so nowadays, a young lady with good cooking skills will never worry about getting married. During the Song Dynasty, literary style was emphasized, and literary elites were able to serve as ministers. Not only could men attend school, but women could also attend school as long as their families could afford to pay for it. Wealthy families naturally hired 1.1 private professors, but ordinary people like her who wanted to read, write, and earn a living could only spend money to send them to private schools. Although Jingzhen Private School is located in a remote area in the north of the city, it ranks among the top 5 women's private schools throughout Tokyo. The private school covers an area of more than 10 acres, with various garden views and rockery fish ponds. It is equipped with 3 classrooms, 5 tea rooms, and 3 dedicated kitchens for teaching. In private schools, there are 3 extracurricular classes in Class A, Class B, and Class B, and their teaching and training vary. Most of the students taught in Class A are young ladies from wealthy families. In addition to cooking skills, they also learn poetry, calligraphy, and painting, as well as cooking tea and incense. The second priority is to learn cooking skills, as well as basic calligraphy, painting, and ordering tea. Class C is the second best, except for culinary skills, only learning basic literacy and the 4 books of analects. At this moment, Wen Shu was sitting in the classroom of Bingzi, listening to Li Jingzhen, the head of Shantou Mountain and the master, teaching them the analects. Confucius said, "When a disciple enters, he is filial, when he leaves, he is brotherly, when he is sincere and trustworthy, when he loves others, he is kind-hearted and benevolent. When he has the capacity to act, he will answer this question." Li Fuzi is over 30 years old, with a beautiful and elegant appearance but simple clothing. He only wears a moonlight-colored long shirt for daily teaching, and his headdress is also simple, with only a white jade crabapple hairpin slanted above his head. It is said that she comes from a wealthy family in Chizhou. Her father once served as an official in the Ministry of Rights, and at a suitable age, she married the 3rd son of the Zhao family, a left attendant. After marriage, she was also a loving couple, with a harmonious melody. But later on, the Zhao family was inexplicably implicated in something, and was criticized by the official family. They were stripped of their positions and demoted to commoners. A few years later, their mother's family also declined along with them. Several years later, Li Fuzi's husband, Zhao Langjun, passed away due to depression. Li Fuzi left the Zhao family in sadness, but did not return to his mother's house or remarry. Instead, he sold all his dowry and opened a private school by the Qingshui River. Because she was only well-known when she was young, many families came to this private school to send their children to school, including wealthy families. For example, many of them brought maids to A-class classrooms. At this moment, Wen Shu heard the master's question and swallowed, wanting to raise his hand to answer but afraid of being laughed at if he couldn't speak well. This sentence was explained by the teacher in class last time, and she still remembers its general meaning. However, after a few days, she was afraid of speaking incorrectly, so she couldn't help but hesitate. Qin Shan beside her had already lowered her head, as if afraid of being pointed by the master. However, she was afraid of anything. She lowered her head and stood out from the group of young ladies sitting upright. When Li Fuzi saw that no one had taken the initiative to answer, he ordered her to ask. Qin Xiaonyang, could you explain it to me? Qin Shan was stunned. After hesitating for a while, she stood up hesitantly and stuttered. The sage said, disciples should be filial to their parents in front of them, obey their teachers when going out, be cautious in their words and actions. As for the rest, her mind was completely blank, and she couldn't recall the meaning behind it. Feeling everyone in the classroom looking at her again, her face couldn't help but turn red. Wen Shu knew she was embarrassed, but because Li Fuzi was looking over here, it was difficult to remind her out loud. After a moment, she saw that Qin Shan couldn't answer and her face was already red with blood. She could only hesitate and raise her hand, saying, Master, I want to try to solve it. Li Fuzi glanced at her and nodded slightly. Okay, then you can talk about it. Qin Xiaonyang, please sit down first. Qin Shan sat down with a blessed body as if granted amnesty, and looked worried at Wen Shu beside him. Wen Shu felt that everyone's gaze had shifted from Qin Shan's side to her, and he couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. He stuttered and said, the sage said that disciples should be filial to their parents in front of them, when going out, they should obey their teachers, be cautious in their words and actions, be honest, trustworthy, and speak few words. They should love everyone widely and get close to those who are virtuous. After practicing this, there is still room for learning literature and knowledge. After speaking, the classroom fell silent for a while. Wen Shu didn't feel nervous anymore. Anyway, the words had already been spoken, right or wrong, she just waited. Fortunately, after a while, Li Fuzi nodded and said, although you're stuttering, the definition is correct. Let's sit down. Wen Shu breathed a sigh of relief and bowed to her husband before sitting down. Qin Shan beside her pulled her sleeve and whispered, thank you. Her words were full of gratitude. Wen Shu blinked at her, and the two of them exchanged a glance and smiled knowingly. Next, Li Fuzi continued to mention analects and answered each person, but he never mentioned them again. P.S. Seeking recommendations and collecting. End of this chapter. 10th Octopus Soup. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 10th Octopus Soup. After the end of this literary class, half an hour later, the fragrance from the kitchen in the left courtyard caught Qin Shan on the side like needles. When the class was over and she went to the park to stretch her hands and feet, she excitedly pulled Wen Shu and pointed to the kitchen in the left courtyard, saying, Sister just smelled that fishy aroma. It was really without any fishy smell. Of course I did. The chef Ji's craftsmanship is self-evident. I'll have to ask for advice later, Qin Shan nodded urgently. Unlike Wen Shu's culinary skills, which were learned due to current trends and Wen Tai's expectations, Qin Shan genuinely enjoys this art and often enjoys holding lively discussions with Wen Shu. The two of them were talking when the left courtyard door, which had been closed all along, opened. A group of glamorous young ladies, accompanied by maids, came out laughing and turned into the A-class classroom on the left along the copying corridor. During this time, a little lady wearing a crimson cotton jacket looked disdainfully at the maid beside her and said, although the fish soup made by the cook Ji is good, it is still much worse than the fish soup made by Mrs. Song outside Donghua Gate. Song's sister.in.law fish soup, even a small commoner like Wen Shu has heard of it, just because there is a legendary story inside that is said to be related to the current government. It is said that the owner of Mrs. Song's fish soup is called Mrs. Song Wu. She was originally a vendor selling fish soup at a stall outside Donghua Gate. However, by chance, she presented the fish soup to the official family. After tasting it, the official family praised it greatly, saying that the meat was fresh and delicious, surpassing crab soup, and even rewarded her with several hundred taels of silver. As soon as this matter spread, Song Sa's fish soup became famous in the eastern capital, and many people went to taste it every day. This Song Wusao is a clever person. She immediately set up a storefront not far from Donghua Gate, selling fish soup and called it Song Wusao Fish Village. After more than a decade of operation, it has now become a prosperous destination in Tokyo. This little lady picked this particular thing to say, just to show off to everyone that she has eaten Song Sa's fish soup. However, the people accompanying her are all young ladies from wealthy families, and most of Song Sa's fish soup has been tasted, so there is no one taking over at the moment. Wen Shu and Qin Shan listen from a distance, somewhat curious about the taste of Song Wusa's fish soup. After about half a cup of tea in the garden, 2 female envoys invited them to the kitchen in the left courtyard. Qin Shan had been talking about fish soup for a long time, and when she heard this, she quickly led Wen Shu ahead. In the kitchen, a nearly 30-year-old cook named Ji was wearing an apron, with her back to them, tidying up fresh fish on the stove. In the wooden basin not far from her, there were also several fresh live mandarin fish swimming. After hearing the commotion behind her, she turned around and said calmly, "Today I'm going to teach you all how to make fish soup." The owner of this fish soup is fresh, tender, and smooth, so he pays great attention to the selection of ingredients and heat. You all need to pay close attention and listen carefully later. She then turned around and continued to pack the fresh fish. She is an experienced chef, and her knife skills are self-evident. While speaking, she has already removed the scales and gills of the fish, cut open the abdomen and internal organs, washed them, and cut off the head and tail. She uses a flat knife to slice the fish into 2 pieces along the spine from head to tail. When making fish soup, the first choice is mandarin fish. Its meat is tender, with fewer spines and more meat. Secondly, it should be fishy. As the cook explained, she took a large bowl and put shredded scallions and ginger into it. She then placed the sliced fish on top with the fish skin facing down, and then spread a layer of shredded scallions and ginger on top. Wen Shu and Qin Shan stood on the side, watching with good eyes, afraid of missing the deodorization steps. This dispels the fishy smell. Besides scallions and garlic, Shaoxing wine is also very delicious. After setting up the shredded scallions and ginger, the cook Ji sprinkled some Shaoxing wine and fine salt on the sashimi, and then put a large bowl into the pot to start steaming. The kitchen has a female envoy who specializes in cooking, and the cook Ji puts the fish slices into the steamer, then busy preparing other ingredients. Wen Shu saw her take out various ingredients such as bamboo shoots, mushrooms, and eggs, and secretly calculated how much it would cost to make this fish soup. She has never cooked fish at home before, but most of it was stewed soup or pan-fried. The laborious process of making fish soup has never happened before, let alone adding these ingredients. In her dazed moments, the cook Ji had already started an oil pot. She added lard, stir-fried shredded scallions until fragrant, and then added high broth to boil. This broth should have been roasted before they came in, and Wen Shu smelled it and thought it was chicken soup. Sure enough, at the next moment, the cook said, "This broth is simmered with chicken legs at noon." She added a little yellow wine and then added the sliced shiitake mushrooms, bamboo shoots, and simmered inside. The mandarin fish in the steamer is also steamed, and the cook takes it out. She uses chopsticks to pick out shredded scallions, ginger, and fish bones and skin, then pours them into the broth, adds a few drops of soy sauce, and boils them together with shredded bamboo shoots. After the soup boils, pour the beaten egg mixture into the pot and stir well. When the soup boils again, add vinegar, pour 60% hot lard, and then roll it into a soup bowl. Sprinkle with shredded ham and ginger, and it's ready. Alright, this is the cooking process of fish soup. Kichi Ji took off her apron and asked the female envoy waiting next to her to serve a small bowl of fish soup for each of the young ladies present to taste. It's good to have a comparison when practicing at home like this. Taking the small blue chrysanthemum bowl handed by the female envoy, Wen Shu lowered her head and saw that it was filled with oily and pleasing fish soup. Taking a light sip, she felt even more fresh, tender, and smooth. Wen Shu has never tasted Mrs. Song's fish soup, and he doesn't know how it tastes, but the bowl of fish soup made by Kitchi Ji today is already delicious enough to be swallowed with one's tongue. Unfortunately, the quantity of this one is too small, it's only a matter of 2 bites, and we can only taste it. The students in Class B's extracurricular classes have similar family conditions, and very few people can afford to eat Song's sister-in-law fish soup or often go to eat it, so they all praise the fish soup made by the cook. The cook Ji felt much better when she heard it in her ears. When teaching the Jia Z classroom before, a few students whispered in private, saying that although her fish soup was made well, it was not as good as Mrs. Song. Although she admitted it in her heart, it was a bit uncomfortable. Now that the students in Class C have praised me so much, I feel that my confidence has returned and my frustration has dissipated. After finishing the cooking class, today's class has come to an end. Wen Shu and Qin Shan bid farewell at the entrance of the private school and went home separately. At this moment, the rain outside had stopped, but the ground was still damp. In order not to get his shoes and socks wet, Wen Shu still carried a bamboo box and slowly walked back with an umbrella. When she arrived home, she saw that her father had already returned and was playing with the set of iron sheets picked up from the shop in the courtyard. "I'm back." Upon hearing the commotion, Wen Tai looked up. Wen Shu responded lightly and placed the umbrella by the door. He took a small bamboo piece from the wooden tube behind the door, supported the wall with one hand, and gently scraped off the yellow mud on the shoe upper with the other. He asked, "Dad, have you inquired about this matter? How much can the government subsidize this time?" Wen Tai shook his head with a worried expression. "There's not a definite number yet, but according to your Uncle Qian, it probably won't exceed 5 guan. "What? So little?" Wen Shu was shocked and stopped scraping the mud at the moment. He threw the bamboo pieces and rushed over with a few steps, exclaiming in an urgent voice, "Last year, Wang Lishuang was hit by a disaster. Didn't we hear that he also received 8 or 9 guan? How did we get 5 guan here? What did Uncle Qian say? Is there any evidence?" The money uncle mentioned by Wen Shu is the shopkeeper of Qian Ji's rice shop on the front street. She has always had some friendship with her father because his family has a nephew working in the yamen, and he always knows the news from the government earlier than the average person. What else can we do for? Last year, Wang Lishuang provided more subsidies because the former governor, Mr. Bao, was upright and loved the people, which gave him the maximum subsidy. Now that he has changed his position, Wen Tai sighed and shook his head. Thinking of the official voice of the newly appointed governor, Wen Shuxin also felt a chill. Reading tip. Song Sa's fish soup has indeed happened in history, but it happened during the reign of Emperor Gaozong of the southern Song dynasty. According to the Wulin Chronicles, written by Zhou of the southern Song dynasty, on March 15, 1179 AD, Emperor Gaozong of the Song dynasty, Zhao Godong, boarded an imperial boat to leisurely tour West Lake. By the time he arrived outside the Qiantang gate, it was almost noon. The attendant asked the emperor, "There is a restaurant here where the fish soup tastes very good. Why not taste it?" At this moment, Emperor Taishang was also hungry and ordered people to get off the ship and buy fish soup at the restaurant. The shopkeeper of the restaurant, Mrs. Song Wu, saw people from the luxurious yacht coming to buy fish soup, probably from a royal family, so she personally cooked the fish soup and sent it to the yacht. Emperor Gaozong of Song enjoyed the fish soup while inquiring about the background of the fifth sister-in-law of Song. Mrs. Song Wu said that she was originally from Bianliang, Tokyo. She once operated a fish soup restaurant in Bianliang, Tokyo. When the Song dynasty moved south, she came to Linen, now Hangzhou, and ran this small fish soup shop by the West Lake to make a living. Emperor Gaozong of Song not only praised fish soup, but also appreciated the character of Song Wusao, so he specially rewarded her. As soon as this matter spread, Mrs. Song's fish soup became known as Mrs. Song's Fish Soup and gained widespread fame. P.S. Seeking recommendations and collecting. End of this chapter.